Hello everyone, my name is Marina Osechko, and today I would like to present to you my data analytics final paper. Let me share my screen and go into the presentation. Just a moment. Okay, so for this research paper, I chose to do CO2 emissions research. The study examines global CO2 emissions from 2000 to 2010, focusing on regional trends, clustering by emissions levels, and correlations with population and life expectancy. This study highlights key insights such as emissions patterns in the United States and offers projections to inform environmental strategies. Data preparation. So I used the world indicators data set from Tableau. I created calculated fields such as average CO2 emissions, high emissions, and low emissions. I also created total life expectancy calculated field and created flags to indicate high emissions versus low emissions. I also created parameter called CO2 emissions parameter. I created CO2 emissions dashboard for my presentation, and we're going to take a look at it shortly. I annotated points and areas in Tableau charts and modified axes and titles. At this point, I would like to go into our Tableau dashboard, which is published in Tableau Public. And then I will read my questions and we will look at the charts together. And here is my Tableau. Okay, so question number one that we chose to answer reads as following. Create a visualization of global CO2 emissions by region over time. Add global CO2 emissions in 2010, grouping countries into clusters based on their emissions levels, high versus low, and what country has the highest emissions. So in our first story, you see world CO2 emissions by region over time. And you see that Asia has the largest or the highest CO2 emissions. And in the bottom, we see world CO2 emissions in 2010. And flags indicate dark blue high emissions and lighter blue low emissions. And here you will see that the country that has the highest CO2 emissions is China. So next story answers the following question. How did average CO2 emissions correlate with population across different regions over time in 2000 through 2010, and which region stands out? So here I created a scatter plot that I would like to play for you. And you see a correlation between average CO2 emissions and population. And the region that stands out the most is Asia, has population of 3.8 billion and average CO2 emissions of 419,000. R squared is 0.91, which indicates a strong correlation. For question number three, we chose to answer which region had the lowest average CO2 emissions during the years 2000 to 2010. And here you see a bar chart shows average CO2 emissions by region. And let me play that for you. And you will see that the region that has the lowest CO2 emissions is Africa. Question number four is how strong was the correlation between life expectancy and CO2 emissions in 2010? And so this is the chart depicts average CO2 emissions versus average total life expectancy in 2010 by region. You will see that R squared is 0.67, which indicates a moderate correlation. And moderate correlation pretty much means that while there is a relationship between emissions and total life expectancy, but there are also other factors at play that influence total life expectancy. And our last question is, what were the CO2 emissions in the United States in 2010, and what predictions can be made regarding future CO2 emissions in the country? And here you see CO2 emissions over time in the United States. And here is the flag that filters United States out, and the trend goes as following. In 2010, it shows 5.4 million of emissions, and future prediction is 5.5 for 2011 and 2012. So this pretty much increases slightly from a prior year based on a previous trend. And let me bring you to our conclusions for the paper. So China has the highest emissions in the world, as does Asia as a region. Next conclusion is the biggest average CO2 increase is seen in Asia, also a region with the largest population. So there is a strong relationship between population and CO2 emissions, suggesting that as the population increases, CO2 emissions increase at a predictable rate. Next conclusion, Africa region had the lowest average CO2 emissions during the years 2000 to 2010. The correlation between CO2 emissions and life expectancy is moderate, suggesting that while there might be an association, other factors beyond CO2 emissions also significantly impact life expectancy. And the last conclusion is CO2 emissions in US were 5.4 million in 2010, expected to increase to 5.5 million per trend in 2011 and 2012. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you everyone for your time.